I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In the last couple of days, a new mugshot has been released of Kaitlin Armstrong. Now, as some of you know, I sat in on about 3 trial days, mostly just in the morning when I was in Austin, Texas. Most of the time you saw the back of Kaitlin's head. There were a couple of times when she got up to leave the room that she glanced very quickly into the gallery. I actually think I made eye contact with her on one of those occasions. But one thing that really surprises me with the mugshot is how big her ears are. And not only that, the one ear seems kind of lopsided. The one ear actually seems to be lower than the other, which I definitely didn't expect. I don't mean to be critical and I don't mean to be mean. It's just something that I noticed. Now, at the moment, Kaitlin's release date from prison is July 3rd, 2112, although her parole eligibility is July 3rd, 2052, which is just under 30 years from now. So, if she does come out of prison in 30 years or so, she'll be about 65, 66 years old. What do you think? Should she be released on parole? As for my analysis of this case, it's almost coming to an end. There will be this episode and then one final episode after this one. Before we get to this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis interesting, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button. Oh, and by the way, I am doing a live tonight on the Karen Reed case. From a legal perspective, if you're interested in the law and lawyers and legal strategy, and also just a case that's very full of twists and turns, you might want to catch that. That'll be at 3 p.m. Eastern. Okay, and now let's get started with this penultimate episode covering the Mo Wilson case. When do you think Colin Strickland got the first inkling that something was wrong? And I think that is something that is, to some extent, intertextual with the Karen Reed case. At what point did she suspect that something was wrong in terms of John O'Keefe? Now, do you think that Colin started getting a funny feeling on Wednesday night, that is the night of the murder, or do you think the inkling percolated through his subconscious sometime through the night or early the next morning? Well, as a matter of fact, when Strickland woke up on Thursday morning, he actually still had no idea that his world was about to shatter into a million pieces. Now, what I often say on this channel is that we need to be better at critical thinking. And whatever you may think of that statement, if you look at Colin, his friend has just been murdered. He's now going home to spend the night with the murderer of his friend, and he doesn't seem to know any better. And you from the outside looking in might think, jeepers, this is totally obvious. It's not obvious to him. And it's in that sense that we've got to be careful living in our own worlds with kind of blinders on, not paying attention to what's going on around us. And in any event, how do we know that he had no idea about this? Well, it's once again thanks to the excellent reporting in that long-form article on Outside Online by Ian Dill. This is a quote from that article. Lance Tyndall, a commercial real estate agent and recreational cyclist, got a text from Strickland at around 8 a.m. that Thursday, the morning after Wilson's murder. So Strickland gets up that morning. I take it he didn't go for a bike ride. I suppose he could have gone really early. But in any event, he wakes up and Strickland has texted him something about bicycle wheels. And the background to this is that Tyndall had been trying to connect with Strickland to buy some used wheels, some second-hand bicycle wheels, and Strickland suggested that he come to the house, Fort Knox Street, and I've obviously visited that house myself just to record some footage, but he said come by there at 10 in the morning, mid-morning. And so that is what Tyndall did. He drove up to the house. He actually noticed that a police vehicle was already there, and he saw Strickland pulling out of the driveway as he arrived. Strickland saw Tyndall reverse to move in his direction, so Strickland wasn't trying to avoid him, and roll down his window. "Hey, I've got to go to the police station. One of my friends died last night, and the two of us had gone swimming." "Like a homicide?" "Yeah. It sounds like she was murdered." And apparently Strickland looked anguished. What is interesting is that he refers to Mo anonymously. He doesn't say her name. He says, "One of my friends died last night, and the two of us had gone swimming." He doesn't say where, although I don't think that's such a big deal. But what I think is interesting is, does he have some guilty knowledge here? Is that why he doesn't say Mo's name? In other words, between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., the cops were on Strickland's trail already. First thing the next morning. That's pretty quick. How did that happen? Well, probably because Kaitlin Cash, after they'd basically cleared her, she must have told law enforcement that Mo had gone on a date, told law enforcement what she knew about Mo and Mo's movements and who she was seeing. Well, and what if you don't want to call it a date, you might want to call it a late afternoon swim followed by a dinner. But she knew that where Mo was going and who she was going out with. Now, according to the article, Strickland told Tyndall the wheels were inside. He didn't just tell Tyndall to go home. Let's sort this out another time. He said the wheels were inside and that Armstrong knew he was coming. So it's quite interesting that how much he wanted this deal to be done, and makes you sort of wonder whether Colin was a little bit cash-strapped at that point. In any event, shaken, Tyndall walked up to the front door where Armstrong greeted him. Now, what's incredible about Tyndall is what we have here is a first-hand account, not only of Colin's demeanor, which seems to me innocent, if, as I say, a tad naive, but more important, he has a brush with Kaitlin, whose world is also on the precipice of permanent implosion. And so then Tyndall and Kaitlin started talking about the murder, and she told him that Mariah Wilson was the victim. Now, the thing that's, I think, quite interesting here is that if Colin hadn't mentioned the murder, I wonder whether Kaitlin would have spoken about it at all. And what's also interesting is that when Kaitlin tells Lance Tyndall that Mariah's the victim, that is a totally different turn of phrase than Kaitlin would use just a few hours later at the police station, I think that same day, where she'd referred to Mo vaguely not only as that girl, but someone she had no idea had any connection to Colin. But just to reiterate, Colin mentions Mo without mentioning her name, which is why when Tyndall goes into the house and he brings this up, he doesn't know what her name is, and then Kaitlin helpfully provides it. But then she doesn't do that at the police station. It really is quite interesting. According to the article, as Armstrong talked, she began removing some of the extra parts from the wheel set Tyndall was buying. So from this, you get an idea just how involved Kaitlin is probably in Colin's life. That she would help him fix his bicycle, help him fix a puncture. Someone who's so into the whole bicycling thing that she's quite a decent mechanic herself. And I've said before that a big part of this narrative that is underappreciated is the bike part, the bicycling part. In any event, she explained to him, Kaitlin explained to Lance Tyndall that Wilson was a phenom who'd won big races in California, including the Sea Otter mountain bike race in Monterey and the Belgian Waffle Ride, a tough event in San Diego that she'd taken by an astounding 25 minutes. And so here you have Kaitlin basically educating this guy Lance, basically giving him a heck of a lot of information on Mo's bio. And doesn't this kind of really give you a sense just how well Kaitlin knew Mo, right? Just how much she'd had Mo kind of in a way, her nose rubbed into Mo's achievements. Anyway, as Armstrong worked, she looked at Tyndall and said, "Is Austin really becoming this sort of city?" Which is, in an indirect way, a way of asking, what do you think happened here? Confused, Tyndall asked, "What do you mean?" And then she said, "Are we really this violent of a city?" And so what we get via this interaction is both Kaitlin's capacity to keep her head in a situation like this, as well as her talent for dissembling. And dissembling means to conceal or disguise one's true feelings or beliefs. And again, in the courtroom, I think one gets a real sense that she's used to doing this, hiding her true feelings. Now, that's also quite remarkable if you think about it, that Kaitlin could completely lose her shit in a relationship sense, in an emotional sense. But when it came to covering over a murder, where you'd think there'd be a lot of insecurity, a lot of nervousness, a lot of anxiety, well, then she's cool as a cucumber. And so you kind of get a sense that with Kaitlin, this coolness could be a default setting, certainly by the looks of things. Going back to the article, maybe, Tyndall said, noting that homicides had increased across the country and that, yes, as Austin grew, there was bound to be more violent crime. And then he said this, "But a professional cyclist who just happens to come through town for a day or two gets murdered. No, I don't think that's something that's normal for the city of Austin." And that was quite an astute observation from Tyndall. You know, from a true crime perspective, he's spot on. But this guy's probably not a true crime buff. He's probably someone who's just aware of the social fabric. And obviously, people in realty tend to be quite aware of it. And again, he was absolutely right. It wasn't normal, which is to say, what Kaitlin did was a million miles from normal. And this chance remark, loaded really with truth, did ruffle Kaitlin a tad. She realized, wow, it's kind of obvious that what happened here isn't something that can be dismissed as a crime statistic, things that happen all the time, you know, random crime statistic. And so cool as she was perhaps too cool when she said the next thing. And even Tyndall, his sort of ears pricked up when he heard this, and he thought, wow, that is a strange thing to say. And what Kaitlin then said, and this is essentially her Freudian slip, the slip of the tongue, she said, "Is Cherrywood a bad neighborhood?" And I actually went there. I went to that neighborhood where Mo was killed. And the writer of the Outside Online article notes that the murder actually took place in a neighborhood a few blocks south of Cherrywood in East Austin. The city's east side, according to the article, is where neighborhood boundaries can be fuzzy, but it's historically been home to Austin's lower income and minority communities. Though, as people in Austin generally knew, over the past couple of decades, it had been heavily gentrified. Tyndall said that he had friends who'd lived in the area for decades and never had issues with crime. In fact, he said a mutual friend of theirs owned a house there. And so you can kind of get a sense that Tyndall may have reacted to this question. He may also have responded in a certain way that may have unnerved Armstrong, where she realized, jeepers, I've made a mistake here. I've assumed something that is not the case. And so doesn't it look like Tyndall was the wrong dude to make small talk about East Austin? Because he said, it's definitely not a neighborhood where there are random acts of violence and murder. And this wasn't good news for Kaitlin. This was something that I think she assumed people would think. And so first thing on the morning of, essentially a morning that was supposed to be the first morning of the rest of her life with Colin and without Mo, this was a terrible start. Remember, Kaitlin wasn't a native to Austin. And once again, you just see how important the local fabric is, knowing the local fabric to figuring out crimes and criminals. And that's one of the reasons why I go myself personally and enter this local fabric. You don't necessarily need to speak to people, although that helps, but you get a feel for a place by walking its streets, by getting a sense of the advertising that's going on there, getting a sense of the type of homes that are there, getting a sense of, just a sense of place. And so that was what Kaitlin still didn't really have. She thought she did, and she likely thought that what she did to Mo would simply be swallowed up, engulfed in the tsunami of anonymous crime statistics that are part of everyday life in certain quadrants of certain cities. And here she's speaking to a local from Austin who's saying, I don't think what happened here was normal. This wasn't just a random crime, a random act of violence. And so if Kaitlin's super cool exterior was now too hot to handle, if she was flushing or blushing, if she needed to gulp or swallow hard or take a breath, well, that was best done in private. And so at this point, Armstrong excuses herself. She's just kind of been corrected in an assumption. And she then, at this point, she'd removed everything except a tire from one wheel. And a tire is fairly easy to remove. And so in her absence, Tyndall tried to get it off, but he couldn't. And sitting there, he felt a bit odd about the situation. Colin wasn't there. Armstrong was there, but she kind of excused herself. And now he was waiting for 10 minutes for Armstrong to reappear. 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, I'd love to have been a fly on the wall. Probably, given where Colin already was and given what Tyndall had just said, Kaitlin probably realized for the first time that what she'd done...
Not a great plan.
And perhaps she was in a bathroom looking at herself in the mirror and realizing that it wasn't a great plan and realizing, you're fucked. What are you going to do? When she emerged, obviously, or probably she'd gathered herself, she'd regained her composure. She then removed the tire and Tyndall left. Tyndall told police that it would later occur to him, how did Armstrong know the area where Wilson had been murdered? And of course, it was later proved in court that she was driving around that area extensively. And possibly Kaitlin realized the same thing as well, that she'd been too casual and thus overplayed her hand with Tyndall. And who knows, perhaps she even considered getting rid of Tyndall for a few moments there before thinking better of it. Perhaps that was part of what was going on during those 10 minutes, a little bit of a wrestling with her own intent. Now, can you imagine if one could have waved a magic wand and for whatever reason, Kaitlin didn't mention Colin until later? I'm talking about Kaitlin with the C. Kaitlin Cash didn't mention Colin until much later, and so the police didn't arrive at Colin and Kaitlin's residence the next morning. And perhaps Kaitlin herself emerges as a temporary suspect for a while. And perhaps from there it becomes a vagabond familiar to the area, within this scenario of it's a random act kind of thing. And can you imagine if the police didn't arrive in Fort Knox Road first thing the next morning, and when Tyndall arrived, perhaps a more ignorant and blasé version of Tyndall had answered instead, oh yeah, Cherrywood is full of crime. Then how would Kaitlin's life have continued from that point onwards? Could it have gone on happily ever after? Because that is exactly what Kaitlin expected. She expected her life to go completely back to normal, even after what she'd done. And in that respect, I'm not sure it's just about being in denial, because what we're seeing is such a fierce attachment to a fairy tale. It's almost in the realm of being suffering from grand delusions. I mean, it amounts to having a screw loose. Having a screw loose like that means it's just a matter of time before the machinery of your world crashes and burns against the iron-hard facade of the real world. And that is why critical thinking is so important. It can save us from catastrophe. Thank you for listening. Look out for that live stream at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Karen Reid case. If you wait until the end of this episode, you'll see the title image for that video coming up. Please subscribe so that you can vote in the poll, and I think it'll be quite an interesting discussion. And I'll see you guys then.